Hi, this is Tina Turner, and welcome to The Week in Rock.
This week, we've got a special half-hour all-star in-depth look at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, how it started, who gets inducted, why it hasn't been built, why you can't see the annual induction show on TV, and why that may soon change. Hi, I'm Kurt Loder. Welcome to The Week in Rock. This week, we're devoting our whole show to an examination of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which, as you know if you were watching last week, held its 4th annual induction ceremony in New York City on January 18th. For openers, let's take a quick look back at some highlights of that jam-packed all-star bash. The 4th annual Hall of Fame bash was in many ways the best one yet. There may have been fewer mythic names in attendance, like Bob Dylan and the Beatles in years past, but there was a lot more music, starting with Little Richard's all-stops-out induction of soul giant Otis Redding.
I can't turn you loose. If I do, I'm gonna lose my mind.
There were interesting connections this year, too. Little Richard, for instance, not only knew Otis Redding, he was the model for Redding's early musical style.
He was a rock and roll singer, but you know when you're black and do that, it's called blues. When you're white, it's rock and roll. You know what it is.
Hall & Oates, inducting Motown's Marvelous Temptations, pretty much shelved their speech, too, in favor of singing.
If your first lover broke your heart, there's something that could, oh, honey, baby.
One of the main highlights of the night, though, in a weird way, was a non-performer, producer Phil Spector, a legendary eccentric who was inducted by Tina Turner.
He was always eating apple cores from ashtrays. Gosh, Phil, I couldn't believe he was driving me nuts eating those apples from those ashes on them.
Spector, apparently seriously overfueled for his trip to the podium, was accompanied by a trio of very businesslike bodyguards who, judging by what they seemed to have concealed behind their cummerbunds, were prepared for any eventuality, which was perhaps more than could be said for Spector himself.
I just thought the plane would just, land me here.
A more touching note was provided by a suit-and-tied Lou Reed, who, in the course of inducting his idol Dion DiMucci, also delivered an elegy for the great doo-wop music of his youth.
The lyrics sat in my head like Shakespearean sonnets, with all the power of tragedy. Gloria, why don't you write me, darling? Send me a letter to Jax. And then there was Dion.
Even more moving was the acceptance speech by inductee Stevie Wonder, who celebrated the spirit of music in what is often a brutal and loveless world.
That spirit is so beautiful. Why? Why should they suffer? Why should we have poverty? Why should we have gang violence? Why should we have racism?
Perhaps the most eagerly awaited induction of the evening, though, was the Rolling Stones, who put aside the internal squabbles that have split the group for the past few years to be inducted by their old pal, Pete Townsend.
Whether the Stones do anything new or not doesn't matter. For me, what we're talking about tonight is what they've done in the past. And that's a fantastic collection of stuff.
Not all of the Stones were on hand, but Mick Jagger and Keith Richards were, and their reunion was the event everyone had been waiting for.
The other thing I'm very proud of is the songs that Keith and I have written over the last 25 years.
And what did everybody's favorite rock and roll guitarist have to say?
I'd like to say thank you to Leo Fender for making the goddamn things we got to play, right?
And then the traditional jam session began, and from there on out, it became an evening of non-stop music and nothing but.
Yeah, you start me up. Yeah, you start me up, I never stop. Yeah, you start me up. Yeah, you start me up, I never stop.
Well, quite a show as always. But who actually came up with this Hall of Fame idea? And more important, who are the people who decide which artists get inducted? In the interest of full disclosure, I should mention that I myself play a minor part in this process as a member of the Hall of Fame nominating board. That said, let's take a closer look at how this organization actually works.
I just want to say thanks to the wonderful people of the Hall of Fame who came up with the idea of placing me among such prestigious people as I will be for my grandchildren and my folks to come behind me.
Apart from ever collecting all the money they're owed, induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is the biggest career payoff a recording artist can get. The idea for a Hall of Fame was developed 6 years ago by a group of music business executives led by Atlantic Records chief Amit Erdogan.
It's really unique because it was the first time that competitors got together to work for a common cause, and it got to be something very dear in the hearts of all that are working on it.
The first Hall of Fame induction ceremony was held in January 1986 at New York's Waldorf Astoria Hotel, where the events have been held ever since. The idea was to honor not just rock and roll's greatest performers like Chuck Berry, Fats Domino, and Little Richard, but also non-performing producers, label heads, and DJs, and pre-rock artists whose music had a formative influence on rock.
You know, the purpose of the Hall of Fame, obviously, is to honor and to remember and recognize and hopefully preserve the work and memory of the, you know, the greats of rock and roll, the people who have made rock and roll what it is.
Which brings up the question, what exactly is rock and roll? No two people are ever likely to agree on an answer to that one.
The basic question is, where does rock and roll stop and where does R&B begin? I mean, I think, or where does our rock and roll stop and pop music begin? And I think that the decision of the board was really not to try and too carefully define what is R&B and what is rock and roll, or what is rock and roll and what is strictly pop, but just say that rock and roll crosses all those lines.
The difficulty in defining rock and roll makes for some very lively debates among the Hall's 22-member nominating committee, a group made up of music writers, historians, and record execs. They pick the non-performers and pre-rock influences outright, and they assemble a list of performers who are eligible for induction.
In order to be eligible for induction into the Hall of Fame, an artist must have released a record 25 years prior to the year of induction.
The list of nominees is then sent out to Hall of Fame voters.
The voting committee is composed of about 300 people worldwide.
And it's the same thing, they're writers, or who are these people right now?
It's composed of music industry executives, writers, artists. It's a much broader group than the nominating committee.
All of this explains why, for example, Led Zeppelin hasn't been inducted yet. Since they didn't start recording until 1969, they won't be eligible till 1994. It's also why such rock pioneers as Wilson Pickett and Ruth Brown haven't made it in. Only a relative handful of artists is inducted each year. Their time, presumably, will come. According to Jan Wenner, the reason the Hall of Fame shows haven't been televised so far is because the organizers are leery of turning these very free-form events into anything as slick and dopey as, say, the Grammy Awards. They came very close to allowing this year's show to be aired on MTV, though, and Wenner says that next year there's a very good chance that the whole shebang will be beamed out across the country in its unrehearsed entirety for all to see. We'll be back in a minute with some great moments from Hall of Fame shows past and a look at the actual Hall of Fame building, which has yet to be built. Stay tuned.
Sculptor.
Welcome back to our special Rock and Roll Hall of Fame edition of The Week in Rock. Since the annual Hall of Fame shows never have been televised, you may be wondering what you've been missing. Well, quite a bit, as you're about to see.
What would you have without rock and roll?
You take my nerves and you rattle my brain.
Rock and roll really changed our way of living, our way of thinking, our way of dressing.
In the beginning of rock and roll, none of us knew whether it was going to make it or not.
Some people still think it's the worst music in the world.
I think it's a righteous start.
Ladies and gentlemen, James Brown.
Supremes, I forgot about you. Oh, well, let me go back to it.
John, Paul, George and Ringo.
If my dad had been alive today, this is the one place he wouldn't be.
It's hard to know what Pop would have wanted us to say here, but I can honestly say that there is no other honor that would have meant more to him than this, and I really wish he was here.
I delivered the first statue.
That's right.
Yeah. It's very difficult for me to talk about Chuck Berry because I lifted every lick he ever played. Underneath the tuxedo, I put on this sort of lurid lurex, sort of leopard-spotted black and green jacket.
Okay, Chuck, where the hell are you?
Nobody knows what the hell is going on. Everybody's going, what? And yet, when it's supposed to look as if it's like, yeah, baby, you know. I mean, this is the first time I've inducted anybody, Chuck. I've certainly never been inducted.
They say the neon lights are bright on Broadway.
There goes my baby, moving on down the line.
All together now, I'd like to be.
It is unfortunate Paul's not here because he was the one who had the speech in his pocket.
I wish that Elvis Presley, Sam Cooke, and Buddy Holly was still living.
I don't want to leave a stage ever in my life saying I could have done it better. I want them to say, well, the old cat tried.
The man that I want to bring up in a minute, he could tear an audience apart. I'm talking about tear them out of the frame and throw babies in the air when he got through.
Son, you're looking at the greatest entertainer that ever walked on 2 feet, and they haven't seen nothing yet. This old man has got a trick up his sleeve that's going to show him something they'll never forget.
It's a wonderful, fantastic surprise.
Thank you after 32 years.
We did about 180 performances last year. I'd like to see the Mop Tops match that.
It just touches my heart to know that we can all do this after so many years. Just wanted to slide that in.
I believe they mean every damn word they're saying.
Now, a lot of people are going to go out of this room tonight thinking that Mike Love is crazy. Well, they've been saying that for years.
Dylan was a revolutionary, man. The way that Elvis freed your body, Bob freed your mind. To steal a line from one of your songs, whether you like it or not, he was the brother that I never had.
Peace, love, and harmony is greatly important indeed, but so is forgiveness, and we got to have that too.
Just before Jackie Wilson hit the stage, the women started coming in. Big women, small women.
When Smokey came on, the girl did some strange thing, you know. It was like, I said, there's something here to watch.
I am the first one to say, woo! What everybody else was saying, woo, woo, woo. I was saying, woo! Shut up.
Pretty woman, stop a while. Pretty woman.
In '75, we went into the studio to make Born to Run. I wanted to make a record with words like Bob Dylan that sounded like Phil Spector, but most of all, I wanted to sing like Roy Orbison. Now everybody knows that nobody sings like Roy Orbison.
I feel that I do truly belong. Thank you very much. Down the line, when people want to find me, they can look back and look inside the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and there I'll be.
Okay, that's pretty much how the annual Hall of Fame induction ceremonies go, but what about the Hall of Fame itself, the actual building? Where's it supposed to be, and why isn't it there yet? Let's find out.
The board of directors of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has chosen Cleveland as the site for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Foundation and Museum and Archive Center.
Why? Who's from Cleveland?
Good question. The answer mainly is Alan Freed, the pioneering Ohio DJ who claimed to have been the first to apply the term rock and roll to the music that still bears that name. As for why Cleveland,
I think maybe the other cities are maybe a little too confident that they were going to get it and didn't try as hard.
Good point. Cleveland may seem like a backwater to people in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, New Orleans, or Philadelphia, the runner-up in the race to attract the Hall of Fame. But like those places, Cleveland, too, is a true rock and roll city.
If you put a whole bunch of people from Philadelphia and Cleveland in one room and said, who wants the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? People from Philadelphia went, and the people from Cleveland said, yeah, we want it here.
When they had that USA Today 900 number poll, 110,000 people called in
voting for Cleveland more than all the other cities combined.
Okay, Cleveland landed the Hall of Fame with an outburst of sheer hometown spirit. So why haven't they built it? The answer, as you might expect, is money. Construction costs for the Hall of Fame building were estimated in 1986 to be $20 million. Now, however, they've ballooned by nearly 150%. But is Cleveland discouraged? Not at all.
We're now at the level of about $14.5 million toward our $48 million goal. And that's really been received in the last 6-7 months.
I think initially maybe we were a little naive as to how easy it would be to build a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We just thought, put a building up and there it'll be, but it's a whole lot more than that. But it's okay, it's worth the wait because we've seen the plans, we see what it's going to look like. We know that it is going to be a world-class operation and we're very excited to have it here.
So most Clevelanders are confident.
We are hoping to have the grand opening of the Hall of Fame and Museum in 1992.
And those who aren't figure that whatever problems there may be originate elsewhere.
To tell you the truth, I think the people in New York are just pulling our chains. I don't think that we're ever going to get it here.
Hall of Fame board members back in New York insist that Cleveland will still be the site, but they admit they have no idea when ground will be broken. Much more certain is what kind of place the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame will be when it finally is completed.
We're not going to concentrate so much on artifacts as we are going to try to give the visitor a feeling of the history of rock and roll music and the musics that preceded it. This is going to be a serious place for scholarship and for maintaining the records and manuscripts and everything having to do with the history of rock and roll.
And, of course, Clevelanders have a very definite vision of the Hall of Fame, too.
It's the kind of facility that people are going to go to and go, wow, that's what rock and roll is all about.
Cleveland is now raising money for the Hall of Fame, mainly from private organizations such as Nestle Enterprises, the American Greetings Company, and the Cleveland Plain Dealer newspaper. We wish them well. We'll be back in a bit with a whole bunch of jam session highlights from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame when the Week in Rock continues.
It's a thing they're trying to build in Cleveland in like 4 years.
Oh, it's the best musicians in the world, like Eric Clapton, Mick Jagger just in there.
2 other people just got inducted in, Temptations and some guy who sang old songs a long time ago just got inducted. Dion, yeah, they just got inducted in.
They put in people that have been performing for like 60 years or more, something like that, or 20 years or more, some long period of time.
Any day now, Kiss is going to be abducted into that.
Welcome back to our special Rock and Roll Hall of Fame edition of the Week in Rock. Who'll be going to the Hall of Fame next January? Well, one group that a lot of people would like to see inducted is The Who. Unfortunately, their first hit, I Can't Explain, was released in January 1965, just a hair too late to technically qualify for the 1964 cutoff. However, the song may have been recorded in late '64, and in any case, The Who did record another single that year under their previous name, The High Numbers, so who knows? Another possibility is the Byrds. Like The Who, their first hit, Mr. Tambourine Man, wasn't released until 1965, but they did cut some demos for Columbia Records in late '64 of songs later released on the album Pre-Flight, and those sessions could conceivably qualify them. On the oldies front, there'll probably be a big push for the Four Seasons, who kicked off their long string of hits with a song called Sherry way back in 1962. We won't know who's going in next for sure, of course, until the official list of 1990 inductees is announced next October. Whichever acts do make the cut, they'll all be taking part in the big jam session that ends each year's induction ceremony. These are pretty remarkable blowouts, as you'll see in this roundup of great moments from the last 4 shows.
Each year has been pretty amazing. The first year, we didn't even think that. We were afraid to ask people to play. We spoke nothing about any jam or anything. At the end, Bill Graham, as planned, would say,
"Would you come up, take a picture together? It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience."
And that was the way they fooled them into getting on stage. But right from the first year, I mean, they just ran for those instruments. People really wanted to play.
I want everybody to clap your hands. Come on. This is rock and roll.
1 for the money, 2 for the show. 3 to get ready now. Go, cat, go, but don't you persuade you. You know my temperature rising, jukebox blowing a fuse. You know my heart beating, soul keeps singing the blues. Run over, Keith Richard played the blues.
I'd like to see some people kick out the jams, and I challenge the boss to get up on stage and jam.
Sometimes you see, well, you see a group of people on the stage that no amount of money could ever bring together.
I met a gentle ballroom queen in Memphis. I tried to take her upstairs for the ride. Girl, girl, this romance ride.
And that's the story on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We'll be coming to you from the Mardi Gras crazed streets of New Orleans next week with features on Lou Reed, Michael Jackson, and lots more. But alas, without our intrepid managing editor, Stu Cohen, an old hand here at MTV, and one of the people who helped get the Week in Rock started. He's moving on to bigger and better things, and Stewie, we're going to miss you. We leave you now with some more Hall of Fame stage action, and we'll see you next week.
Everything